Hello, my name is Jacob, and I am a Norse Pagan, and welcome back to the Wisdom of Odin. Today I want to have a discussion, so I figured I'd start a fire for us here and get a nice ambient background, because today I want to talk about Old Norse. Now, for any of you out there, you understand that my reading of Old Norse is not very good, and I'm very forward about this in my videos anytime I talk about this subject. Now, that doesn't mean I don't have a respect and love for Old Norse, and that's kind of what we're going to be discussing today as well. So, for reference, here's an example of me literally trying to read Old Norse from the Heathenry.
Fjasens finget heffer, sile thora thula, opt spere leidum, thats heifer lithium huget, mat ganger ver en varie.
So yes, you can see that my knowledge of Old Norse is not that good, but that doesn't mean it's not important. And so we're going to talk about several layers here, including whether or not you need to speak Old Norse to be a Norse pagan getting started out, how it's important to you today, and to what extent we should speak it. So the first thing I actually want to discuss here is whether or not you need to speak Old Norse to become a Norse pagan or to practice Norse paganism. Now, of course, I'm not from Scandinavia, nor am I from a place that speaks a Scandinavian language, so perhaps my opinion doesn't matter, but I'm going to share it anyways. Because something that happened to me when I first started practicing this religion a few years ago is I feel like I was really, disgruntled by the faith, because a lot of people came forward and saying, oh, you're not pronouncing that right. When you say Odin, it's supposed to be Othin. When you say Thor, it's supposed to be Tor. And if you don't say it correctly, you're not practicing the religion correctly, or your spells and rituals won't actually work. And I can tell you now with much certainty, after practicing this religion for some time, I believe over 6 years now, and forming a community, the Fellowship of Northern Traditions, and running it with amazing people and experiencing amazing events with others, you do not have to speak Old Norse or even have a full understanding of Old Norse to have a connection to the Norse gods. I've been saying it for a while now. This is a religion of illiterate farmers. The people that practice this religion and worship these gods in the past were illiterate farmers for the most part, and so they would have not had any tenuous grasp of, writing or reading or, even pronouncing things correctly. The words would have changed based on where you were. Now that I've traveled Germany and across Europe, I can see that even today, that languages change based on where you are. In Bavaria, they greet each other by saying servus. And if you go to northern Germany, around Schleswig-Holstein, and you say servus, they will have no idea what you're talking about. And yet everyone there greets each other with moin moin. And it's almost like saying, good morgen, guten Morgen, but they say moin moin. And you go to the southern Germany, you go back to Bavaria, and you say moin moin, and they don't know what you're talking about. And so languages change, and that's okay, and they transition. And so obviously, as you practice this faith today, your understanding of the language is going to be influenced by where you're from. If you're a French Norse pagan, you're going to pronounce things quite differently than an American Norse pagan. And of course, if you're in Scandinavia, you have a much more tenuous grasp on the Old Norse language. And so I'm sitting here telling you, don't worry about it, don't fret about it. In order to become a Norse pagan, you do not have to speak Old Norse or have a great understanding of it. Now, when it comes to the difference of having an understanding versus speaking the language of Old Norse, it's important to note that Old Norse doesn't exist anymore. There is no country or ethnic group that fully speaks Old Norse as their language. And of course, you have modern offshoots of it. You have Icelandic, Norwegian, Swedish, Danish, and so you have languages that are very similar to it, but nothing that is actually Old Norse. From what I've been able to tell, Icelandic is the closest to Old Norse as it survives today. Now again, as far as speaking it versus understanding it, I do believe there is an importance to understanding it. And so yes, you don't have to know it in order to become a Norse pagan, but I truly believe it'll help increase your ritual practice if you have a basic understanding of it. So let's actually go back to what I had mentioned with the Havemal previously, stanza 40 here. There's a lot going on here, and a lot of different, usage of language and grammar here that is really hard for an American especially to speak, such as all the ths. There's two different consonants that actually create a th sound, and again, I'm not a linguist, so I apologize here, but reading through this, it can be really hard to go through it, but that doesn't mean you can't slow down and figure things out. You may not be perfect, but you can still figure things out. And so bringing these things into your ritual practice can be something that really influence and improve it. While, you may not be perfect at it, I do believe speaking Old Norse or having a slight understanding of it can increase your connection to the gods. So I think a really good example of this is the reason why I'm actually up here in Minnesota was to see Heilung with members of this community. And so we rented out this place here, and we actually went down to Minneapolis and experienced Heilung together. They speak a lot of Old Norse and German and a lot of other languages, Proto-Germanic. They have a lot of different languages in their show. I don't understand 95% of what Heilung says, and most of everything I understand is from my own research and understanding and explorations into their lyrics. And yet I still have an amazing experience. Everyone I was with had an amazing connection and experience with their music and the rituals that they're performing. And you know, there's people there that have no understanding of paganism, and yet they can still feel the magic. And I think that proves that you can still, you know, just have a tenuous grasp on it and bring in the Old Norse and to create a feeling, to create a sensation. And so if you're looking for a deeper way to connect to someone like Odin, learning his different names like the Song of Father Heitir, which is literally just reading the names of Odin, can be a way to create a deeper connection to Odin. And you can really take this in any different direction. That's one of the reasons we're here as well, is to practice our rituals as fellowship leaders in the Fellowship of Northern Traditions, is to take these rituals and learn and practice from them and expand them. And so a lot of these elements are going to be Old Norse mixed with English so that people can understand us. Because the next thing we really need to talk about here is, you know, this idea, this romanticized idea of being able to speak Old Norse to one another. Now, this may be more of a concept and a theory to some, but this idea that we need to actually speak Old Norse to talk with one another. I think it's fun in practice, but again, Old Norse is a dead dialect. And so, yeah, I think there is merit to think, oh, hey, we should all speak a language together, because I think there is a connection there. But again, I think it would become super gatekeepy, like, oh, no, you can't enter this level of being a Norse pagan until you speak Old Norse and you learn it. And obviously, it's just hard to learn. There are much better channels out there, of course, to learning how to speak Old Norse if you want to learn how, such as Jackson Crawford's channel. He is much bigger into teaching Old Norse than I am, obviously. I'm more about the faith as it practices today, and as it was understood to the illiterate farmers of the past. The other resources I would recommend here are things such as the Havamal. So Jackson Crawford's Havamal here has the Old Norse as well as the English side by side. So this is a really good resources that I use. And then of course going even deeper and having an Old Norse Poetic Edda alongside your English translation, and then also an Old Norse dictionary, which is quite an intense experience, but I really recommend it, and it's something I'm starting to do now. But as far as like, yeah, should we speak it with one another like the secret language? I think it would be fun, but I do think it can become, again, a little gatekeepy. And I think a good example of this is that balance between Heilung and Catholic Mass. Because for a long time, Catholic Mass was only in Latin for hundreds of years, and people didn't actually understand what they were talking about. They were expected just to show up, listen to a language they don't understand, and leave. While there may be some spiritual and religious element to that, they ultimately had no control or understanding of their faith. And so if we, if the faith goes to the point where you have to understand Old Norse in order to practice it, I don't think that's actually something that's healthy, even though it could be kind of interesting. And again, I can't have any form of a conversation or even say my name in Old Norse, but I do think bringing these elements into a ritual practice would be something that could help you out. The last example I'll share here is what I'm personally working on here, and here at this gathering around this fire, actually, and that is a chant that I learned in Old Norse that comes from the Havamal, and it's the chant of, do you know how to write the runes, do you know how to read them? And again, I feel like I'm going to get massacred here online by saying it, but again, I want to share with you this is what I'm working on. So the chant itself is Fetso Hiva Rista Skal, Fetso Hiva Ralva Skal, Fetsa Hiva Fas Skal, Fetsa Hiva Freista Skal, Fetsa Hiva Bithya Skal, Fetsa Hiva Blota Skal, Fetsa Hiva Sinda Skal, Fetsa Hiva Soa Skal. And so I had to remember that. I had to sit down and remember that and memorize it in order to perform this ritual, and now I have it, for the most part, beat into my mind. And I'm using this in a rune ritual. So again, this is something from the Havamal, from the source material, that I'm taking into my personal practice to grow a deeper depth to connect to Odin and to connect to the runes. And so yeah, I wanted to share that example with you so you can see how you can use Old Norse, perhaps in your own practice, to learn more. So yeah, I think that's it. I think that covers what I wanted to say here. Again, this is something that I wanted to talk about because it's something I still see to this day, people asking me if they need to speak Old Norse in order to become a Norse pagan, and how far to take that conversation of, no, I don't believe you need to speak it, but I also think it's important to have a tenuous grasp and understanding of Old Norse in order to deepen your ritual practice. Thank you so much for joining me for this video. I hope you've enjoyed this discussion, and please join me down below in sharing your thoughts with us and sharing whether or not you think that my idea of, Old Norse being something that, shouldn't necessarily be needed to practice religion, but it's something that can help grow depth. And definitely, you know, if you haven't, please go to Heilung. It's an amazing experience. I really think it helps you understand this religion as it can live and breathe today. And I truly believe Heilung is one of the most important things that happened to paganism in this contemporary modern era. So thank you so much for joining me for this video. And all of these names coming down right here are the amazing people who choose to support this channel on Patreon. If you're interested in getting your name on this list, please head down below and head to my Patreon. It truly is the only way I'm able to continue to do this, to share conversations like this in front of a fire with all of you. So thank you so very much once again, and until the hall, Skål.